In this video, we're going to be taking you through setting up a Fox suspension fork. That means we're going to be looking at setting up the sag on there, that's the air pressure, and then we're also going to be making some adjustments to the damping, both compression and rebound, and telling you how they apply to you. Now, fear not, these adjustments are fairly similar across the board, no matter what brand you have. But Henry actually made a video on RockShox forks recently, which you can be able to see in the link under this one. But today, like I said, let's get cracking on this Fox 36. Okay, so let's just have a quick breakdown on the fork itself, just so you understand what we're going to be adjusting and why you need to be making those adjustments. Now, visually, you see a suspension fork is basically made of two major parts, the lower legs and the upper legs. Now, these lower legs are known as sliders, and this is how they mount your wheel and your brake to the bike itself. Your upper legs, they're known as the stanchion tube. That is these gold Kashima coated tubes you see here. Sometimes they're black tubes, depending on which model of Fox fork you have. Now, these are directly bonded into the crown, and then you have a steerer tube that goes into the headset of the bike. So this entire unit is a single piece, and it's known as the CSU, or the crown steerer upper unit. Now, on the inside of the fork, the rider's right leg contains the damping. That's this leg here. And the rider's left leg contains your spring. On most Fox forks these days, it tends to be an air spring, and they use a spring called the EVOL, which is the extra volume air spring. Now, this spring is very easily adjustable to both your body weight, and you can also adjust the air volume on the inside, which we're going to be dealing with a bit later. But it's quite cool because you get to play with these little things. Now, the right leg, as I explained, has the damping features in here. This particular fork has the Grip 2 damper, which means it has both high and low speed compression mounted at the top of the leg and high and low speed rebound mounted at the bottom. Now, across the board on Fox products, rebound is always in red, as you can see here under this cover. At the bottom of the leg here, you can see it's got two dials for rebound, and compression is actually blue, although this particular model in this color actually has a black dial, which can be confusing, but just think it's always red for rebound and blue for compression. Now, to set the fork up, the first thing you need to do is to adjust the air spring on there, basically to give you the correct sag. Now, sag is a measurement used to refer to the term of the fork sagging under your body weight when you're on the bike. Now, fork needs to sag in order for the wheel to track the ground. Just think, you don't just get impacts that allow the wheel to travel up towards you, you're going to get hollows and holes in the ground. If you watch any pro racing, you'll see their fork tracking that ground. That is ultimately what you're looking for. You're looking for ultimate traction on the front end. Now, to control that traction, the next things you're going to need to be adjusting are both the compression and the rebound on the fork. The compression absorbs those impacts, of which we're going to get into a bit deeper a bit later on, and then the rebound controls the rate at which the fork returns to full travel. Now, this is an adjustment you really need to get correct, and it is very biased towards your body weight. The more air pressure you have in a fork, the more rebound you'll need in order to control it. Now, although this Fox fork has the EVOL air spring, the damping might be different to your particular one. Now, there's three major types of damping you tend to see on the Fox forks at the moment, or at least ones that have been in circulation in the last few years. You get this style, which is known as the Grip 2 damper. So you have two forms of compression and two forms of rebound on there. But you also get the Grip damper, which has your rebound dial still at the bottom of the leg and has a compression at the top, but it's a dial instead, just a single dial that you can actually mount in a number of positions. And then you get the Fit 4 system, which has a 3-position dial, which effectively means you can have the fork open, a mid-setting, which people refer to as trail, or closed, which means it resists moving to your body weight. Ideal if you want to get out the saddle and pedal hard without the fork moving up and down. Now, helpfully, Fox actually includes something on the back of their forks. They've got this digit code you can see just here. It's in slightly different places depending on which model your fork is and which year it was out, but that code is unique to your fork and the year it was manufactured. You type that code in on the Fox website and it will take you directly to your manual, in which case you're going to find some really useful information. You're going to be able to work out how much sag in air pressure you should be starting with according to your body weight, and they make this measurement in kilograms and pounds so you can actually figure that out yourself, and then they give you some good base settings. Now, base settings is what we're going to get to in today's video, but I'm also going to tell you a little bit in how to sort of make adjustments on those in the future. Okay, so before you get going, you're going to need a few tools to help you on your way. The first and the most important one is a shock pump. You will not be doing this process without one of these, so make sure you've got a good quality shock pump for the job. Now, you might also want some air volume spacers. If you've managed to buy the fork aftermarket, you will have had some of these included with your manual in the packet. Now, if you're going to be using these, you're also going to need the relevant socket for your fork. Now this does differ depending if you have a 32, a 34 or a 36, but it's the same principle for installing them. We'll get to that a bit later in the video. And finally, the last thing and the most important thing of all of these is you. You're not gonna be able to set this up without you and your bike. Now, you also want to be wearing your riding gear in an ideal world, at the very least, the riding bag and the amount of gear that you tend to carry in it, because this does affect your body weight on the bike. And setting up the air pressure to get the correct sag is all biased around your body weight. For example, if I was to ride to work with no bag one day and I had 20% sag, and I had it set up for that, all good. But I might ride with a really heavy camera bag that could weigh as much as 40 pounds sometimes by the time you've got tripods and lights and all the other stuff on. That's gonna dramatically affect how my fork feels. So you do need to take that into account. Dress up in the gear that you're likely to ride in. Now let's just get the bike ready before we start setting up the sag. Now the first thing you're gonna need to do is make sure you haven't got any compression damping wound on or dialed on onto your fork, because that will affect the sag. So by turning them counterclockwise all the way, you're going to remove any compression damping from there that can affect that sag measurement. And the same applies to your rebound. Okay, so before we get the bike out of the work stand and we start playing with the air pressure, just something to make sure you're aware of is the actual sag you're going to be setting up for. Now we regularly refer to between 20 and 30% of the available sag being fairly typical across the board with bikes, although Fox in particular suggests with their forks between 15 and 20% is what you're looking for. So today I'm going to set mine up for 20% of sag because I like my bike to feel a little bit more active and, let's face it, a bit more comfortable. Now this can be a process that's made easier if you've got a friend available to you to help you hold the bike up whilst you sit on it, but you can actually do it by leaning up against the wall, perhaps outside your house, or even if you've got a workbench like this one, you can lean up against that. So first thing, before we make any adjustments, is just let's find out how much sag you've actually got with the bike as it is. Now on this particular fork, it's a Fox 36 and it has an O-ring on the left-hand leg. You might find by chance yours is on the right-hand leg. Now this is really useful because you can use this to set the correct sag. So I want you to get on the bike. Now balance yourself up nicely against a wall or object, or get your friend to help you here. And then stand up out the pedals and stand in your sort of attack position, perhaps with your weight slightly biased towards the front end. Now bounce up and down a few times. Now if your friend is helping you here, get them to set that O-ring right down against the seal. If you're doing this yourself, this is where things get a little bit tricky, as you're going to have to do this without disturbing it. Now set that O-ring against the seal, now very carefully release your body weight off the bike so you don't give it any more sag than it actually has recorded by the previous process. Now you need to measure how much sag you've got here, and then you can make adjustments from this. Now this particular fork has 140 millimeters of travel, and I want to be running 20% of sag. So you literally do 140 divided by 100 times 20. In this case, that gives me 28 millimeters. That's what I'm looking for as my sag measurement. Now I'm going to be quite precise about this because I like to stick to the numbers, but you might find that you could go for 30 millimeters. You know, it wouldn't be against the rules, say, but 28 is what we're looking for here. Now you might find you fluke it first time, but chances are you're going to have to repeat this process several times. So let's assume that this one here is slightly too soft. I'm going to have to inflate some air into the fork. So very carefully thread your shock pump onto the Schrader valve at the top of the rider's left leg and inflate some air into the fork. Then carefully remove it and start the process all over again. Get on the bike, set your sag by pushing the O-ring down, bounce up and down, reset that, make a measurement. How are you doing? Is that sort of vaguely in the right area? You need to repeat this until you have the correct amount you're looking for. So like I said, between 15 and 20% is what you're looking for. I'm going for 20, which is 28 millimeters on this fork with 140 millimeters of travel. Now, something really important to underline here is the amount of air pressure that your fork can actually accept. There will be a max pressure for your fork. It's 120 PSI on this particular one. Again, this is a 29-inch wheel, Fox 36 with 140 millimeters of travel. This may be different on your fork, so definitely check this, especially if you're on the bigger side. Now, once you have your sag set up on a bike, it's time to get a good base setting with your damping. Now, bearing in mind, it'll be a complete fluke if you manage to get this perfect first time. Perhaps you've actually had a Fox fork before, so you'll have a rough ballpark to get to. But the point is, you want to get a good base setting. And then you head out for some ride, like a shakedown ride as we like to call them here at GMBN. And on that ride, you'll start feeling what the fork feels like in different situations, and then you'll start making natural adjustments from that point. But the base settings provided by Fox are actually really accurate, and you tend to not make that many adjustments to them in the future. Now, quite helpfully, you'll find on one of the legs, it'll be different on which fork you have. There's a little chart at the bottom here. So this one says rider weight, air pressure, and rebound. Now, I'm about 89 kilograms, okay? So on this Fox 36, that means with high speed rebound, I'm gonna be running 3 clicks, and low speed rebound, I'm gonna be running 4 clicks. Now, something that's very important to say is the measurements that they refer to are from fully closed. That means before you make those adjustments, bearing in mind that you unwound them to set your sag, you need to completely close them, then you make those adjustments. So 3 clicks from fully closed and 4 clicks from fully closed. But this may be different with your rider weight. As you can see on the chart here, it gives you a good place to start with. And of course, this is all going to be down to how you ride. Perhaps you want more comfort, perhaps you're a really fast, aggressive rider, in which case you will generally need more rebound and more compression to really make the fork live up to what it's supposed to do. Now, when it comes to compression, it's a little bit different. The settings are a bit looser to get right to start with because they're more biased to the way that you ride, how aggressive you are and what you're looking for in the bike, as opposed to how heavy you are, which is where the rebound really does come into effect. Now, on this fork, you have low speed compression and high speed compression. And they really refer to how fast the fork moves, i.e. fork moving at low speed or the fork moving at high speed. Now, the types of things that make a fork move at low speed could be your pedaling. If you're sat down and you're spinning, you might notice the fork bobs a little bit, so you can control that with that low speed compression dial. Also, weight shift on the bike. Heavy braking will make the fork compress. You can make the fork stand up a bit more with more low speed compression. Now, low speed compression does a lot of cool things, but bearing in mind that if you have loads of it dialed on, your fork will feel slightly harsher on those really small bumps. And you can almost get the feeling of the fork not being quite so grippy as well, which you'll directly feel on perhaps roots and sort of loose turns. So there's a halfway house that you want to find over time. Now, once you have your setting, it's a good idea actually, and the same with rebound, to write these down. Put them on your phone, maybe in the note setting. Then any adjustments you're likely to make in future, if you cock it up, really, you can go back to square one without having to sort of do the whole process all over again. It's definitely good to have base settings with air pressure, your rebound, and your compression. Now, the high speed compression, this is a bit different. This is all about ultimate impact absorption. So the fork is going to be moving really fast at this point. Now, if you have too much high speed compression, it can actually choke the fork slightly. Now, sometimes you might hear this referred to as spiking, and you actually feel quite a harsh, almost like a damping spike through the bars. Now, if you have too little on there, then the fork's not actually going to absorb that. Now, a mistake you do see a lot of people making is by not having any high-speed compression on the forks because they want it to feel nice and soft and supple in the car park. But as soon as you go hitting stuff hard, you're going to need more high-speed compression. Again, this varies with the level you are with your riding, how heavy you are, and the way that you ride a bike. So start with those base settings first. So for me, being 89 kilograms, Fox recommend 5 clicks of high-speed compression and 10 clicks of low-speed compression. And those are both from fully closed, just like with the rebound. Okay, so now you have a good base setting on your damping. That's your low speed, high speed compression, low speed, high speed rebound, and your sag. Now it's time for the good bit, to get out for a ride. Now don't go expecting the fork to be perfect first time. Take your shock pump with you out on the trail. And it's at this point you can start making some fine-tune adjustments. But again, make sure that you write down where you are with this base setting and work from that, whether you have to go firmer or softer or make more or less damping adjustments compared to how the bike feels. Now, a few things to sort of help you get your head around things. How does it feel? Are you using a lot of travel at the front? If you feel like you're using too much travel a lot of the time, it might be a little bit soft. You might have too much sag, in which case you want to increase the air pressure slightly, and vice versa. If you're not using enough travel and things feel a little bit harsh, you want to decrease the air pressure, which increases your sag. Now, take note of what the O-ring is doing on your fork. That's what it's there for, is to help you not only set up the sag, but to monitor how much travel you're using. Now, if you've got a full suspension bike and the back end is feeling quite good on it, have a look where your O-ring is on the shock. You kind of want to get a similar balance. Now, if you're riding much steeper terrain, you perhaps might want to have a slightly firmer setup on the front just to give you a bit more support. But there's another way of getting this as well. Now, once you've made these adjustments on a shakedown ride and you figure out what you want to do, you might want to start playing with the air volume in the fork as well. Now, you might find that the sag is correct. You might find that the fork feels good, but you might find that you're just using too much of that travel too often, despite the fact you're running, say, 15% sag. In which case, you can actually tune the feel of the air spring by using air volume springs. Now, these decrease, the more you put in, they decrease the air volume chamber on the inside of the fork and making it a more progressive space. So the further you get into the travel, the firmer the fork will feel. This is brilliant if you're a really aggressive rider, or if someone you just like jumping off loads of stuff. If you're like Blake, for example, he fills his forks up with these things. Now, do take care when you're putting these into a fork, because firstly, there's a limited amount that you can put in there depending on the model of fork and the amount of travel it has. On this fork, I can fit 8 of these in here. That's quite a lot, and the fork will feel incredibly progressive, and I might never use the last 2 centimeters of travel, but that's kind of also quite good, because if you're the sort of rider that's very aggressive, likes to jump off stuff, you've got that little 2 centimeter buffer there for those really hard impacts to get you out of jail. But also, you might not be using all that travel, and the sag might be correct, in which case, you'll probably want to remove some air volume spaces from inside your fork. Either way, you will need the relevant socket for the top of your fork. Now, this one is an actual Fox one. This actually came with this fork for me. It's a 32mm socket for a 36, but it's a smaller socket for a 34 and a 32 accordingly, as the diameter of the legs of the fork gets smaller. The important thing with the socket is that you must use a 6-sided socket, and it must be completely flat on the top. It's a very shallow head on the top of the fork here, and if you slip, you will round that off, and it's going to be near impossible to get it off. So make sure you use the correct tool the first time round. Now, with the air volume system on the Fox forks, it's really quite simple. So as you can see, I've got some spacers in here already, and for this demonstration, I'm just going to add in 2 more just so you can see. Now, it's quite easy. They literally click together. It's super easy to just add or subtract the amount that you have in there. But like I said, with the base settings, note down how many you've got, then go for another shakedown ride, see what the bike is doing, see how much travel you're using. Does it feel harsh when you're going really fast on chattery terrain? Does it feel like you're wallowing too much? Take note of what the bike is doing, and you can kind of start figuring out what parts the fork play in that, and you can get a really good setting off the back of it. Now, I've just been making these adjustments on a Fox 36, which has the Grip 2 damper, which means it has 2-way compression and 2-way rebound control on there. Now, if you're making the same adjustments on your Fit 4 or your Grip damper, then it's actually a lot faster for you to get to the sort of base setting and get out on the trails than it is with these. These do take a lot more time to get quite right. And to be honest, after a few months of riding this, I think I'm mostly there, but I still do make adjustments to low speed compression and high speed rebound. They're the two I kind of chop and change with a bit. Now, something important to say is it's really easy on the forks with the levers on, i.e. the Grip and the Fit, to accidentally leave these on. So if, for example, you're climbing up a fire trail or a fire road, you might want to stop the fork moving completely so you can just hammer up there. If you're doing that, you might have it on fully closed on the dial. That would be turning the dial fully clockwise. Don't forget, before you drop into that trail, to make sure you undo it. It's not going to damage the fork because it does have a blow-off feature on it, but it's not going to feel very nice, that's for sure. You won't get much travel used, and you'll feel it in your hands. Now, with the Fit 4 system, there is one other adjustment available to you. So you have the open, the mid, and the closed or the locked out setting, but there's also the little low speed compression dial on the top. Now, that basically changes the feel of the fork when it's fully open. So if you want the fork to feel nice and supple, but you might find it's I don't know, perhaps dropping too much under braking, you can add some clicks of low speed compression on there just to keep it up a bit higher. Alternatively, you could position this in the mid setting, which I do see a lot of riders doing, having it fully open with not much low speed compression in order to keep it really supple and forgiving on the hands, but also having the luxury of putting it in that mid setting if they need a bit more support and a bit more damping through rougher stuff. My preference is actually to adjust it fully open, and I'd rather run the fork fully open if I could and only use the lever settings in certain situations, but that is entirely up to you. The cool thing about setting up suspension forks like Fox is there is no right or wrong. There's a good ballpark to get a good feel for it. and then you work from there. I'd love to know how you get on with your fork. How many spacers are you running? Do you like your fork to feel linear or progressive? Do you like them fast? Do you like them slow? Let us know what setups you're running on your suspension forks in those comments underneath. And if you want to see the video all about RockShox that Henry made recently, well, that one's going to be hovering around somewhere about there.